And so the transition begins. Welcome on the big stories. We're talking about the NDC's transition team flagging last-minute recruitments and a 240 million Ghana Cedi ECG payment, raising concerns about the severe fiscal implications and more. We're going to be digesting a plethora of issues. But to kickstart the conversation, we're going to be joined by the Member of Parliament for Boko, Mahama Ahiagbah, who is also a member of the transitional team on the side of the NDC, the National Democratic Congress. Mr. Ahiagbah, a very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to your listeners.
It's a pleasure having you this morning. Of course, I'm here together with Sweetie Abochi, my co-host as well, and we'll have other guests who will join us along the way. But so far as this transition is concerned, we've heard a few things here and there, but I'd just like to find out from you, what so far has been the transitional process been like up to this point?
The process has been as stipulated by the law. The law says that within a certain period, 24 hours after the Electoral Commission declares the results, the process should kickstart. And it requires that where there's a change in regime, the outgoing president should nominate his team, which is spelled out in the Act. Specifically, it has to be his chief of staff, his attorney general, his defense minister, his finance minister, and a couple of others. So they are specified in the Act to go and work with another team selected by the president-elect to constitute themselves into a joint transition team. And that team will divide itself into a number of committees. And those committees will look into several matters. First, on the priority list is an inauguration subcommittee. Then they will look into how to organize the entire inauguration of the new president, the venue, the logistics, all the international guests, and etc. will be the preserve of that inaugural committee. And then you have a government machinery subcommittee, which shall be responsible for arrangements for the handing over to the new administration of the machinery of the civil service, including the ministries and the departments and agencies under the ministries. And then the third statutory subcommittee is the presidency subcommittee, which shall ensure the orderly transfer of all official assets and liabilities of the president, the vice president, the ministers, the deputy ministers, the regional ministers, the deputy regional ministers, and the presidential staffers to the new administration. So those are the specific tasks and assignments set out in the law. But then the members of the committee may also feel a need to set up other subcommittees and assign responsibilities to those other committees. So yesterday, after the president had nominated his side and then the president-elect had also nominated his side, we met at the International Conference Center where both leaders, spoke to Ghanaians and proceeded to inaugurate the committee. There were photos taken of the members of the committee with the two leaders. And then the committee went to work. So we went to work to try and set out the members of the three main committees. That is the inaugural committee, the government machinery committee, and then the presidency committee. And we had some preliminary discussions basically around all sorts of things that were happening. We're receiving reports left and right about some haste in payments of certificates, some haste in processing recruitments and issuance of appointment letters, and so many other things that we received complaints about. But it was similar to the transition in 2016, where Osafo specifically wrote a letter directing that none of those things should occur, or even if they were to occur, they must be under the aegis of the joint committee. So we drew the attention and said, look, this has happened before, and you felt that once a party had lost elections, they should not go ahead and make major payments. They should not go ahead and then do recruitments and etc. And so we just want a similar treatment to apply here.
All right.
And we discussed that extensively, and we came to some arrangements to set up a committee to look into those allegations and then report back to the joint committee so that a decision will be taken. We also mentioned that we wanted additional subcommittees, and that was agreed in principle. And
Which additional committees are these ones? Which additional subcommittees are these ones?
Yeah, for instance, we wanted a subcommittee on the economy, a subcommittee on infrastructure, a social subcommittee, and a subcommittee on security. The idea is that we want to collapse all the ministries into one of those subcommittees because they are supposed to be handing over to us the handing over notes. A significant number of the handing over notes were available, but quite a large number was also unavailable. And there was talk about those not available being at the assembly press being printed. So we gave ourselves today as a break so that they could finish up with the printing work and then get it to us. And they are going to be voluminous. There's going to be a lot, and there are so many agencies involved. I mean, also yesterday we were talking about over 200 and something, agencies.
200 and how many?
I have my notice in my car, but I could get it to you later. But over 200, agencies that needed to submit their handing over notes. So some were in, some were not in. So we gave them today to try and then fast track the process and then print whatever is left out for us to have. So if you look at that number and you look at the current number of the committee, you can see clearly that we can't do that work. We need to bring in additional hands, subject matter specialists to focus on agencies that not all of us in the committee have the skills to evaluate reports on their performance and the work that they have done.
Okay.
So that is the basis for asking for additional committees.
Right.
And so they agreed.
So
yes.
Just so we can be, we can accelerate the conversation. There are other, guests, and then there are a plethora of issues we have to look at. But just quickly, very quickly on this, and then my colleague Sweetie Abachi will come through. You touched briefly on this. You have raised key issues about last-minute recruitments. You point to Osafo Mafo in 2016 and some of what was put forward. There's also the 240 million Ghana cedis, meant for an entity that conducted business with the ECG. Very quick thoughts. I want specific thoughts on that. What has been said at these transitional meetings?
Yeah, we drew the attention of the finance minister, who is part of the transition team, that he was making some huge payments, and we thought that was in bad faith. That at this last minute, you will be struggling to empty the coffers before you leave. Payments amounting to, 250 million Ghana cedis, just one payment. We're not even talking about other payments that may have been taken place. And he argued that these were payments that were due, and they were in the budget, and etc. And then we said we thought that he shouldn't be rushing to make payments at all. He should wait for the new administration to come and deal with those issues. And there was a debate, but to tell you the truth, there was no conclusion as to whether or not he should continue making payments or not. So it's a matter that we'll pick up again tomorrow when we meet. Now, on the issue of the recruitment, we had a heated debate, and then I recall that we said that whoever is being recruited is a Ghanaian, but we wanted to be sure that what was being done was in good faith, because we noticed that during, especially in the security agencies, we noticed that the recruitments were not advertised. There was no due process. Opportunities were not given to all Ghanaian youth to participate. And indeed, we saw MPP candidates, sharing those recruitments as part of the inducements to get voters to vote for them in their various constituencies. So we demanded that we take the recruitments case by case to investigate it and interrogate it. If, for instance, a recruitment was properly advertised, if there was proper due process, and if there was fairness in the process, and those people had applied, and they had actually gone through the interview, the medicals, and etc.,
right,
according to due process, and they are now at the stage of being awarded employment letters, then, of course, we are human beings, and we are taking over the country on behalf of all Ghanaians. So if those people, that process was fair, we will take a decision on that. But if we do an investigation and we cannot convince ourselves that the processes were fair and that they were rushed through as part of political, what do you call it? Part of the
expediency
and then efforts to win votes, and that Ghanaians were not given a fair opportunity to go for those jobs.
All right.
We take another type of decision in relation to those ones. It was agreed. In fact, I had strong support. I was leading that charge, and I had strong support from some people on the other side. So it was agreed that a committee should look into all those recruitment matters and bring us a report to decide which ones we should nullify and which ones we think were fair and should be allowed to go.
Right. Sweetie? All right. Mahama Ahiagbah, we are grateful that you took the time to join us on this, and we wish you the best with those transitional meetings. Mahama Ahiagbah is the legislator for the Boku constituency. He also is a member of the transitional team on the NDC's side. He just joined us for a conversation. Joining us in the studio, we have Nana Heninto, trademark hat on, and of course, he is a senior campaign advisor to Alan Chemarting of the Movement for Change. Should I add that you're a former General Secretary of the New Patriotic Party? And
it's a historical fact.
It's a historical fact. All right. And we also have Kofi Kuranting, who is an independent presidential candidate. He was in the 2024 elections.
Gentlemen, welcome to the AM show. I want to start with you, Kofi Kuranting. How did it go for you, the election? You were quite confident that Ghanaians would turn out for you. I was trying to actually find exactly what figure you pulled in the presidential election, but I haven't found that yet. But tell me, how do you think you fared?
I think we did very well. Elections, usually people would have different twists and turns and perspectives on elections. But my take, which I think it's really the take that everybody should be looking at, is Ghanaians went to the poll and made a statement. They made a statement that they were more concerned about things that they had a challenge with, which is how President John Mahama was treated in the last cycle. And they wanted, as sympathetic as we are as a people, they wanted to give Mr. Mahama another chance because they thought he had been misrepresented by the Akufo-Addo Bawumia government. So they gave him a chance that, listen, we're going to give you a chance for you to come and straighten out things because we think they lied on you, which in some cases they did. So come in and finish your term and let's see what, but this time don't fail us. And they were not willing to look at any other candidate for that matter. If you look at the numbers and you study the numbers well, the same people who voted for the NDC, the same amount of people who voted for the NDC went back and reaffirmed their commitment to the NDC. But then people in the MPP were disappointed by their party's performance, and approximately 2.1 million people did not show to confirm their commitment. So it was, we want to bring our president back to show Ghanaians he's better than what you guys made him out to be. And the other party said, you know what, we've been disappointed by our party, so we're not going to go vote. So, but as far as I am concerned, they know I'm good. They believe in me, but they just said, you know what, out of fairness, let's let Mr. Mahama go to complete his 8-year term. It has nothing to do with the numbers.
Okay.
If I may, just quickly, before you actually get to the transition bit, that math about, you see, some 18 plus million people registered to vote. Out of that, we had a turnout of about, what, north of 10 million, about 11 million. You can't make assumptions, and I've seen people make assumptions that, oh, in the last election, the MPP got about 6 million, and so it is a net loss. It is. You don't own anybody. That's one thing politicians should come to. You don't own people as NPP. You don't own people as NDC. You don't own people as independents. Absolutely. Get used to that as politicians.
No, but that's
you
what
don't
I'm
own
saying.
us. So this bit about 2 million more people didn't show up to vote for. No, the floaters are becoming more, and the party caucuses may be shrinking. So this bit about maybe some people didn't show up to vote. It could also be that based on the low voter turnout, it was just those who showed up to vote. This was how they felt. That's it.
No. But it goes to my point. My point is, of course, you have to take when you juggle all the numbers and you put it together. The bottom line is there was a deficit of 2.1 million. So that you could slice it any way you want, but 2.1 million did not go. But we know that on the NDC side, at least the same numbers are showed, because it could also be argued that, listen, if people really did feel the way that the numbers showed as far as on the NDC side, then why didn't we get more? If we went up until the same number of people who showed up the last time, then maybe the lid theory came in, which is they hit the lid and came down.
Right.
But, but from my perspective, because I went around and spoke to a lot of people, and I got the feeling people got this thing. People understood me. And without a doubt, they still call me and tell me, hey, listen, without a doubt, you have the best policies, which I believe I do.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Let me circle back to the conversation we had with Mahama Ahiagbah on the transition team, which was inaugurated yesterday. What do you make of it?
Well,
from the government and the, president-elect's team. What do you make of the team, and especially on flagging that 240 million Ghana cedis and all that?
From our experience, after 32 years of watching the MPP NDC and their performance, I can only say that we are yet to see what the results and the outcome will be. I work from a perspective of results. Nothing really shakes me down in terms of all the, all the makeup, results. So we want to see what this, we know we have a huge problem. Ghana is basically terminally ill. And Mahama would have to bring the axe down. In my last statement, my advice to him is he has to bring the axe down. Enough of the, Tea Party stuff. The axe has got to come down. So that we will see the value that the transition team will bring to his government once it's installed. And we're looking forward to...
On bringing the axe down, does this feed into it? Flagging this payments, these recruitments and all that, does that feed into your narrative?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, we got to... Listen,
so
he's got to be... he's got to go in pounding.
Right.
No, seriously, because, listen, if he doesn't have this attitude and really wanting to fix this thing, then nothing is going to happen. We're coming in at a net loss. So there is a heavy climb up. We need to retrieve the monies, and we need to retrieve all the monies. And it's also going to affect his administration, because you cannot point to the NPP and not point to the NDC, because...
Are you speaking retrospectively, or you are speaking about moving forward? And let me add, there's been talk about Operation Recover or Loot, ORAL, as they call it. In fact, some people have specifically called for action on the SML deal, on the Ahiagbah deal, and all of that. So what exactly do you mean?
But that's, you're absolutely right. And this is what I'm saying, that, listen, we're not going to go to IMF. We can't go to IMF. He has to stay away from IMF. So how are we going to get the money? Well...
He says he will review, not to stay away.
Well, review is a nice, sexy word, which really means nothing. We want results. So we're not talking about review. We know that, listen, we have records, so we know it happened. Go in and extract. Review.
Okay. Let's move to okay, Benjamin.
Just quickly, I see Vincent Percy Adai sending a message on the back of what I was asking about 2 million votes. He says, Mr. Host, do you understand trend analysis? Vincent, I'm sure you are the expert here. I'm sure you know a lot more about trend analysis. I'm sure you're the expert. So as and when we activate the phone lines, you can call in and explain it better to us, respectfully. Thank you. Nano Hininto, the transition so far, what are your thoughts?
Well, it is required by law, and it is good that once the results were declared officially by the Electoral Commission, both the sitting government and the incoming government have gotten down to implement the law. The law clearly stated, I was listening to Honorable Ahiagbah, and I think that the processes that have been initiated fall in line with the law. So I think it is just the right thing to do, and is expected. So that's about it.
Right.
Yeah. So the law, it's merely, this is the letter of the law, this is what it says.
Yes.
We are adhering to it.
I'm saying this because I was hearing one MPP MP.
Frank Anodombre.
Whose seat is in contention.
That was, I'm sorry, respectfully, that was a joke.
Yeah, well, but this is a lawmaker. It's not a joke.
A lawmaker. Well, you have a point.
This is a lawmaker.
I say it's a joke from the standpoint of it doesn't even...
Yes, a lawmaker suggesting that because there is some confusion or controversy over some seats,
whose outcome will not affect the eventual outcome of the election anyway.
The president, the sitting president, should suspend the implementation of a law and a process that is constitutionally mandated. I found it quite strange.
It's egregious, actually.
Yes.
A lawmaker.
Yeah, a lawmaker.
Says something
that's what I'm saying. It's not a joke. Yeah, and he was very passionate and said, I am calling on the president to suspend the transition process. And I said, my goodness, what kind of democracy, what kind of member of parliament is this? I mean, does he know what he's saying? Does he understand? Really. So that's why I said, it is the law, and it is important that laws are respected and laws are implemented irrespective of whether we think this or that or we feel this or that.
Right.
That's why I said that. Yes.
Alan Shermantin puts up a good fight, I would say.
Yes.
And congratulations, although you didn't
Thank
win.
you. Thank you.
What do you think accounted for your, I wouldn't call it a loss, but you didn't win? And how would you assess your own campaign?
Well, before I even go to the assessment of campaign, let me look at the outcome of the election itself generally. I think the statements that Ghanaian voters have made is that we are basically stuck with the duopoly. It's two powerful parties, and you actually heard people saying, well, we'll make a choice between the lesser of two evils. I mean, I get those kinds of comments. Two, a lot of people will tell you, listen, we've looked at Alan Shermantin's GTP, we've listened to his message, we've looked at his track record. We think Alan is the best person for the job, but he's not going to win. And I'm like, what kind of thing is this, you know? Even the NDC people, my friends in the NDC would say, look, your GTP is the best. You give it to us, and since you don't have the structures to win an election, you give it to us, we will implement. Kofi Adams even made a joke with me here in the studio, you know. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon that we're looking at. It doesn't look like immediately Ghanaians are ready to get out of their comfort zone, even though there's been a lot of complaints about the previous John Mahama government, and much more so about the current Akufo-Addo government. So for me, it looks quite like the issue, the phenomenon of the duopoly is something that we have to deal with. And if anybody is really serious about taking up the leadership of this country, I still think it is quite some distance before Ghanaians will consider an independent, irrespective of your credentials, because that's what the Alan Chamating candidacy is telling me.
Are you coming
everybody,
to this, sorry to interject. Are you coming to this conclusion after
Yeah.
the election, or did you know going into the election that Ghanaians were not ready for an independent
No,
candidate?
I mean...
And if so, why did you continue anyway?
You see, a lot of people had complained about John Mahama's previous government. Many more Ghanaians have complained about Akufo-Addo Bawumia government. So you would think that naturally, I mean, if people are not happy, they're not satisfied with what is available to them, and they do have an alternative, they do have a choice, then they would consider it. Here is a case they decided, well, you know, we're not ready. And I think you grant it to Ghanaians.
You were also an alternative. You were an alternative. In fact, you put yourself forward as an alternative. Kofi Granting put himself forward as an alternative. But let's face some key factors. Some say that Abid Enisu, right from the start, you didn't stand the chance of a snowball in hell. You were going to burn at the polls. And it did happen. You didn't even place third at the polls. Nana Kwame Bediako, you know, performed better in many respects. But the question, another question people were asking, can you run government? They were asking that because they were saying, listen, you don't have candidates across the length and breadth of the country. If you get here, in fact, Alan Chamating had made mention of the fact that if I get in, I'll still fall on the MPP and the NDC to rule the country. And people had said, if we're going to do that, then why should we even vote for you?
I think fundamentally,
maybe the loss.
There's something that, I don't think so. I think fundamentally there's something that a lot of us haven't really appreciated about the notion of a national unity government. Even President Kufuor, who came out of the party, attempted it to a very minimal extent, but he gave a hint that, listen, even if I am an MPP candidate who has become president, it makes sense to consider bringing in people outside of my party. As we speak today, President-elect John Mahama has already given a hint that, look, I'm going to look at the possibility of employing whatever resources that are available to this nation, even if they do not fall within the immediate perimeter of my party. So at the background, it is very obvious that this exclusionist government of the duopoly seriously is not helping us. So it is there. Maybe it is a question of maturing. It is a question of people growing to understand that we could even get better results out of our governments if our governments begin to be a bit more inclusive. And that is the fundamental point that Alan Chamating's campaign represented. So
I agree with you.
I don't think that it is a question of saying right from the start you knew you were going to get bent. I don't think that's the case.
Right. I agree with you.
Looking at the level of entrenchment, and I'll go back to it, of the two main parties, definitely anyone who's going to go into this contest would understand that you are fighting with two giants at the same time.
Their tentacles are way deeper.
But it was worth sending out that signal. And I'm sure that with time, Ghanaians will realize that it is not just about a party. The discussion will narrow down to a leader, their leader. I think it is coming. And it will take some effort by people like Alan Chamating, by people like Kofi Granting, and the rest of them who took basically the bull by the horn and stated that, listen, in spite of the duopoly, let's send a signal, let's send a message. And I believe that on the back of that, I expect President John Mahama to be a little more inclusive, even if it's an NDC-led government. I wouldn't be surprised if President Mahama now begins to get a little more inclusive.
All right. Oh, yeah. What do you say? Two very quick things. Yes. One, people say Alan performed poorly, looking at where he placed on the log. But then the zero-sum game, winner takes all, that you're talking about, the party structures, and I'm talking about the MPP and the NDC, they have those. Already you see some pushing, shoving, placements, like people trying to put themselves in pole position. We've tried Unigov in this country, it didn't work. I agree there should be some semblance of that.
We didn't get a chance to try Unigov.
Well, the idea was pitched,
yes.
It was poo-pooed. Do we need a union government, or do we rather need maybe proportional representation in different forms, at different layers? You remember Kufuor was talking about our legislative chambers and some of the things we could do. Two quick ones, the way Alan performed and this. I think there may be more to this than just leaving a president to say, oh, maybe you should appoint a few people here like Papa Kwesi Ntum back then, and then it will work. That's it for me, and then Sweetie can come in.
No, you see, I don't really think that the issue has to do with proportional representation and things like that. Yes, you need a government that truly represents the interest of all shades of society. But even with the current system, which doesn't seem to have met the aspirations of a lot of Ghanaians, one very fundamental problem with our governance, I think, is integrity, lack of integrity in governance. Now, even if we had the system that we are operating right now, and people in authority, the president, his vice, his ministers, MPs, people in public systems and structures would serve the public with some level of integrity, I don't think the situation would even be this bad. You know, so even before we go to changing the very structure of our governance system in terms of the political parties and their representation in parliament and so on, even as it is today, if anyone picks up the mandate as president and sets up a government of integrity, we could get better results. Then we can also look at other major structural changes, constitutional changes, and so on. So really, we should now begin to look at our own society and our own system. The people who get into government, the demands of law and the demands of the standards of integrity, whether we would be ready to apply them. I think we can look at what we have existing right now and even make some improvements. And again, let me say, with Alan's performance, as far as I'm concerned, it boils down to what a lot of these people will tell you. We don't think Alan has built enough momentum. We think, as far as the job is concerned, you look at his track record, look at the manifestos that the parties put out, and the testimonies that those who took time to study Alan's, if you like, manifesto, but we call it a plan. It was very obvious that the man knows what he's talking about. But now you go into the other dynamics.
There are some brilliant
ideas. I mean, really, these are things that are very, very doable. When you look at them, you don't even need to be a technical person to be able to understand, one, two, implement. So on the day that the Electoral Commission declared the final results, a couple of the media people interviewed me, and I said that, look, if President Mahama will take a look critically at Alan's GTP, I'm sure he would find a lot of policy solutions that will help not NDC, but Ghana.
In fact,
and I think that will be a very good thing, seriously.
We had Joyce Bawa Mokhtari here. She speaks for the president-elect, and we asked if that was something they would consider. And she said it wasn't out of the question.
Yeah.
Is that something you are considering? If Alan was given an appointment, because he's heavy
that
on
one, Alan has to answer that.
Well, your senior advisor.
Yes, but I would not advise him not to take it. I mean, he didn't give me an appointment, though. He didn't talk about an appointment, but late President Mills invited me to his office before. and had a chat with me and spoke about one or two things. When I had a call that he wanted to see me, I was a bit,
startled him.
Yeah, General Secretary of NPP. But I did. This is the president of Ghana. So I have already said that President Mahama coming back again should see this as a God-giving opportunity for him to send a signal to this whole country that has been so terribly divided under Akufo-Addo.
Right.
And even within his own party, within Akufo-Addo's own party people were so very disaffected. So I hope that this being a miracle, basically, maybe like the Trump thing, President John Mahama would send a signal to change the face of Ghana politics. Like some of us were looking for a change. Of course, moving from MPP to NDC, you might call it change, but for me, it's more like a little bit of a cosmetic change. It's not dramatic.
Right.
If it had been, say, Alan Chemating, an independent, that would have been a huge jump. But it is still change anyway, because the status quo for the last 8 years with MPP wasn't good enough.
People say you're talking about change, so we need real change. But people also make mention of the fact that part of why we're in this duopoly that really doesn't grind much change into the system is the fact that the real structures to bring about that change are not there. So sometimes it turns out to be cosmetic.
Yeah, but the change will not come until you have people like Alan Chemating taking on the challenge.
Alan Chemating cannot do much when the system is what it is, when the system is as laid out.
Let me deal with that. You see, a lot of these things start in the mind. A lot of the things we are doing are in our minds. So if there is no initiative to speak to people, to bring people the awareness that, look, this is how we're going. I'll tell you a short story, it's not long. An MPP person told me that you and Alan Chemating should come back to the party, otherwise you're going to make the party lose. I said, do you want the party to win? He said, of course, I'm a party member. I said, okay, you tell me. Since MPP came in almost 8 years now, what has happened to your business? He said, oh, my business has collapsed. I said, your business has collapsed and you still want that same party to win. 2, how many people who are MPP do you think benefited from the 8 years of MPP? Oh, how many people? All of us have been, So I said, but what is the point? I started talking to this person and he says, oh, I think you are right. We probably need a change. So the change will have to take some leadership, addressing the minds of Ghanaians before you even come to the structures. All the structures you see are a product of our minds and our attitudes and our behaviors. But we don't seem to be able to address those issues.
And we'll come to you in a bit. I just want to stay on the Alan factor, for 1 second. Pre-election, we said that the Alan factor was, it was tipped by analysts to be something that could tip the scales in the Ashanti region specifically.
Yes.
You hear them say the Alan factor in the Ashanti region. And then I saw that there was a lot of work, in fact, boots on ground in the Ashanti region. Would you say the Ashanti region overpromised and underdelivered in terms of how you fared?
No, I wouldn't say so at all. Immediately after the election, we have been trying to understand the dynamics. And one of the things that is emerging, I'm sure will take time to do a little more of a scientific study of it. We're looking at the situation. We wanted Alan. If we go and vote now, we know Alan will not win. So let's just forget about it. And whatever happens, let it happen. We are getting a signal, a sense that a lot of the people who felt that there has to be change, but that they didn't feel the momentum of Alan in Ashanti region, felt, well, I'll go and cast my vote for the NDC. And since I've decided not to vote for the MPP, I'll just stay at home. So that factor may have been the case. It's not quite the case of Ashanti promising a huge something and not delivering. The dynamics that we seem to be picking now are quite complex as far as the Alan factor is concerned. And we'll find time, we'll spend a bit of time to look at it in detail and see exactly what happened in Ashanti. Yeah.
Mr. Quarantine, I'm sure you have some quick reflections on what we've said so far, but I just want you to maybe assess for me how all these small, I know you don't like to be called smaller parties, but the other political parties, apart from the 2 major ones, how they delivered in this election, and whether you think that going forward, maybe in the next 4-8 years, they stand a chance, or Ghana will see us break away from the duopoly.
Well, let me just say this, and I think there is so much that we're not considering that we need to consider as a people. I love the fact that Benjamin talked about structurally there are things that ought to change in Ghana, or no amount of leadership can change anything. The foundation has been laid wrong, and everybody comes in with a perspective of building something on top of the foundation. It's not going to yield much, plain and simple. And that's why I came in with the mega agenda for Ghana, which is the only pathway to change Ghana. And if you are, if you've done your analysis, you would know that, Kofi, you're absolutely right. If you don't change the Constitution, nothing will change. If you don't eradicate corruption and punish people who have stolen from us, cause financial loss to the state, and take our money back, you go back to the IMF. If you don't institute a national development plan and make it mandatory, people will come in with their manifestos and run the country down. If you don't reduce government and make it practical, make it an airtight system, and you have 50, 60, 70 ministers, it's ridiculous. It means you clearly don't know what you're doing, because you could run it with 10. 10. If you don't invest heavily into agriculture, you don't even have food security. You need income coming in, and you can only do that through agriculture, prudently through agriculture, and no other way. So these are the 5 points of the Quarantine Mega Agenda for Ghana. But now, let me just say this. These are some of the points that we need to understand about our politics in Ghana. We have a huge majority of our people who are not versed in terms of politics. We know that. So narratives are built for them to make a decision on where to go. They go, you give them a muggy cube, you give them a cup of rice, they'll vote for you. And it affects the politics. You also need to understand...
Respectfully, I don't think that's respectful to the Ghanaian voter, because we see shifts over time from there. So let's give the Ghanaian voter credit.
No, listen, I'm not taking credit away from, I'm just telling you what's on the ground, because I was on the ground. So hear me out. A couple of other things. The way that the electoral system is plotted out, there is no way a smaller party outside of MPP NDC can win. You have close to 40,467 polling stations. At all of these polling stations, you have to have reps manning these polling stations, because this is where the hemorrhaging starts. If you hemorrhage at the polling station, it wouldn't matter what happens at the constituency level. It wouldn't matter if you have agents at the national level, regional level.
My sincere apologies for having to do this. Please pardon me. You're in the studio. You have the benefit of our coming back to you right here. Could you hold that thought for me?
Sure.
Briefly.
Sure.
Let me bring in Professor Kwesi Inning. He's a security analyst. He has to go, and so we'll just take his quick thoughts. Prof, good morning. You would have to unmute for me, Professor Inning. Okay, all right. So let's do this. Let's just watch. We're looking at the violence, some of what is characterized in the aftermath of the elections. I want you to watch this. Okay, so looking there, I saw a Shaiman Member of Parliament, Ernest Nogbe. I saw Dr. Peter Boama Otokono. And at some collation centers, it was pretty tricky. The parties were there in full force, trying to enforce their rights, so to speak. But some of what we saw That and including looting and all that. What are your reflections on them, Professor Inning? You would have to unmute, Prof.
There is absolutely nothing surprising about this. All these were predictable. We knew in the aftermath of the 2016 elections and the Vigilante Act, Act 999, that sought to prevent such behavior, that because one party had been in power since then, any election that would seem to bring about a power shift would see contestations about the process, the results, and of course, access to the goodies that come with victory. But we failed the people of Ghana, or the intelligence services, security services, failed the people of Ghana because they did not get the analysis and assessments right. We allowed our partners to bamboozle us into feeling that the threat that this country faces comes from the north, that it's about terrorism and violent extremism. And I've always said, no. If you go to the ground, political parties are split, they are afraid of each other, they are arming, they are telling their supporters to be violent. But our security people were looking elsewhere. So had we put in place proactive preventive measures and said, no, look, this is where we draw the line. This is what you cannot do. Then we would have been prepared enough to nip this in the bud. So the picture that I'm seeing now, some the fridges or televisions being carried away, I mean, this is a very bad signal, because the National Intelligence Bureau in the last 9 months to 1 year was used for just about one thing: doing voter research as to how people intended to vote. And every time the results came out and the powers that be did not like it, they were told to go back and do it again and get another type of result.
Prof,
Yes.
is that not a bit of a low blow? We saw one report, yes, that supposedly came out from the NIB, what used to be the BNI, talking about research into the elections.
Low blow that I am giving a low blow.
The point being that was the only that was the only thing they were doing in the course of the year.
More than 300 staff that I have trained over the last 12 years who tell me things, and I have seen them myself. I don't do low blows because it's undignified, it's disrespectful to people that you are talking about, and it's an insult to my own intelligence.
But Prof, to say that they spent the entire year conducting these polls instead of working, instead of knowing that things like this would happen.
So why have they got the assessment so horribly wrong? In 2020, I wrote a conflict development analysis report for the UNDP. And one of the first statements we made in that report was that the gap to preventing violence in any election was very short, and that action must be taken now. The report is available online. In 2023, a similar report, more extensive in all the 6 northern regions, pointed clearly to the structural problems that some of your partners have been talking about, but also pointing to what could happen because of the frustrations, the anger, the implementation of programs and projects that basically have not worked. Okay, so the signals were very clear right from the word go. And I think we have failed the people of Ghana in not being able to, prevent what we could very easily have prevented.
Prof, so where did this come from? You said it comes as no surprise to you, and this is Sweetie Abochi here. Where I was in the Ablekuma West constituency, and in fact, it was a very peaceful process until we were all moving towards the collation centers. Now, the security personnel there were very strict on checking your accreditation from the Electoral Commission before they let you into the gates of the where we're going to, I think it was Mount Olivet School. Yeah. And that's where the violence or the altercation started. People who didn't have accreditation wanted to go in because they said they had the right to observe. And so if this comes as no surprise to you, what should the security or the IGP, what should they have done to prevent this? Because the actual electoral process was calm, was peaceful.
Very peaceful.
And then collation, that's when everything turned disastrous. So what are the gaps so that going forward, we know what to look out for?
You remember, but in 4 years' time, the dynamics are going to change. It's going to be considerably more violent because people think, well, you sent your people there in proper numbers or in higher numbers to misbehave. When political party officials started encouraging their supporters to move to the collation center, it became obvious. I was in your studios, and we wondered why it was that necessary. Part of the argument from the political parties was that, well, we need to check that our ballots or that our votes count. That reflects a lack of trust in institutional processes to ensure that things are done or that things will be done correctly. So going forward, how do we build trust in the institutions of state that are mandated to do or to perform particular services, so that we don't have this massing of people? Because we know that one of the biggest challenges is about crowd control. Immediately, people gather their agitations, their misunderstandings, a bit of shoving, pushing. It very quickly degenerates. So the first, people's early warning was this appeal to supporters to move to the collation centers. Because, I mean, that was disaster waiting to happen. So if you remember, I think we've had this conversation much earlier on in the year, the speed with which assessments can be done and then passed on to some mobile response teams to be able to beef up the areas where the security officials are being overwhelmed. But let's also not forget that precisely because of the nature of civil-military relations throughout the last 24 months or so, there was a certain reticence in even bringing in the military to back the police service. Because, so you saw the soldiers around, but hardly ever intervened, with the exception of the Obuasi case and I think Akwatia or so. So going forward, we would need to allow the security and intelligence services to do their work, do their planning, their contingency planning, their backup planning, so that these things do not happen. Look, I think the military issued a statement yesterday about using force if their personnel on legitimate duty are attacked. Okay, I think there's still a certain reluctance to use force because it will escalate things, it will bring misunderstanding, and therein lies the usefulness of the appeal by Kodio, the churches, Mr. Mahama himself. The IGP has been bringing out bulletins as to what is being done. But my final point, it is crucial and important that this violence is treated for what it is. These are criminal acts. I think there are more than enough laws in this country to deal with it. We have about 22,000 CCTV cameras spread across this country, except they are just there for show and are not recording anything.
Right.
We've got to get a very close relationship between law enforcement and prosecution to serve as a deterrent. This cannot continue much longer because by the time President-elect Mahama swears that oath on the 7th of January, it would have festered, it would have become, this violence and those perpetrating it would have become more self-confident, and it would be difficult to bring it under control. Is this organized or is this spontaneous? And this is something that the intelligence must be able to answer. If it is an organized form of violence and people are being encouraged to do this from somewhere, then the leadership of those leading this from the back and manipulating the violence must be picked up and also brought before the courts. But we cannot allow this to continue. I think we failed long enough, and I think the failures are beginning to have a net negative impact on the reputation of the country, putting people's lives and properties at risk.
Right. Prof, and right before Bentham, this will be my final bit to you. Apart from the pockets of violence that started at the collation centers, there were instances where civilians were practically putting their lives on the line to prevent military personnel from entering the polling stations. And this is where I think access to information played a big role, because the IGP had cautioned or had told us that no military personnel would be found around the polling station. So is that something we should be encouraging? Because the citizens, the voters knew that no military personnel were supposed to be there, they actually put up a fight. Should we be encouraging that?
Not encouraging the fight, but the information flow. Actually, the Ghana Armed Forces also put out a statement warning its personnel not to go near any polling stations. But there seemed to have been some form of a counter instruction unwritten that emboldened some personnel to do what they did. So there were some personnel on the campus of the University of Cape Coast. I saw police officers or vehicles moving between Ahiagbah and Yamransa, about 2 pickups. At Ahiagbah, very close to some of the main polling stations, at a school compound. There were quite a number of soldiers in their vehicles. Others were loitering around in direct contravention of the rules issued by the armed forces itself, but also the fact that the IGP, as head of the Election Security Task Force, was the only one who would request for support if and when necessary. So there are quite a number of processes and procedures that did not work according to plan. And I think when we get all this thing under control, all this violence and sort of stability comes back once more, then we need to sit down, look at the processes and the procedures, what went wrong, who issued what instructions, and then we can bring this under control. But let me make this point clear. Part of what we are seeing, the foundations were laid far back, I would say around 2021, January, prior to the election of the speaker. If you remember, uniformed people invaded the chamber of parliament, and then they pulled out at a point in time. We never got to the bottom of who ordered or who deployed the troops into parliament, who ordered them to withdraw from parliament. And subsequent to that, we saw the increasing deterioration in civil-military relations. So that by the time Obuasi happened, I think vigilant voters, vigilant civilians said we would not allow people to push us around. That was very unfortunate because militaries play particular roles in societies, and it sent a very bad signal of that particular scaffold. Armed soldiers, I think, being disarmed, put on the ground. And I think going forward, we need to find a way to improve civil-military relations in this country. But I think there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Very briefly, right before you take leave of us, the former president, now president-elect, John Mahama, has said that he is not in charge, and so he can't do anything about security. He's called on those who are on the rampage not to go down that road. if you could say, in the immediate term, actions we should take to crack the whip to ensure that this comes to an abrupt end, what would you say we should do? 1, 2, or 3 quick points, and it's a wrap.
First, first is that the incumbent government must be seen to be acting decisively, ordering its multi-security agencies to do what they are mandated by law. Second, those who have been arrested must be brought before a court of competent jurisdiction. Whatever sentence the law says must be passed and communicated to the broader population to serve as a deterrent. Finally, we need communities, individuals, groups to raise their voices that violence, intimidation, destruction, attacks will not be tolerated, and it's not the way to go. We all have a role to play in this, and not only the government, the incoming one, the security agencies. Every single Ghanaian has a role to play in saying no to the violence that we are seeing.
Prof, we're immensely grateful that you took the time to join us this morning. Professor Kwesi Enning is a security analyst. And we come back into the studio, to be fair, of course, because Kofi Granting, you were making a point and I had to interject. My apologies once more.
No problem at all, Benjamin. And you know, it's funny, you would bring in Prof to speak eloquently about our security issues, but this is exactly why I always have a different perspective on how to handle things and how things ought to be handled. When a body is diseased, when you have cancer, you don't bring in a mortician. You bring in a nutritionist, a homeopath, so that the person changes their diet, they're mineralized, and the body heals. You bring in a mortician, they're telling you after the fact. And the reason why I say that is the violence we're seeing has happened, and it's happening as a result of what? The perception, the general perception that something did not go right. People feel they're being disenfranchised. Processes with the election process was not transparent. And a lot of people feel that there are loopholes for other people with power to take advantage of. And this is exactly what I was saying. So if rather than you wait for something to happen and bring in a security analyst, why don't you bring in an analyst to foresee a problem, diagnose it, fix it, so that we don't have this? We always come back to the table and talk about, oh, well, this happened, how can we fix it? No, it's too late after the point. This is Monday night quarterbacking. This is not, okay, so a couple of things. So you have almost 41,000 polling stations. You expect a political party or an independent candidate to have agents to man these polling stations so that the hemorrhaging that happens at the polling stations don't happen before it goes to the constituencies. Who pays for this 41,000 people? It's a responsibility of the political entity. That means the playing field before you start is not even. They have messed you up before you start. You talk about, oh, Alan Chemanting, you talk about Cheddar, you talk about Kofi Granting and everybody else. Well, how can they play on the level playing field when they're disadvantaged by 41,000 polling stations? How did that happen? Now, another thing. Who has the power to man 41,000 polling stations? You have to be an MPP or NDC because these are the only two entities that have the financial might.
So, Ab initio, the process is not fair.
Absolutely not fair. There's no way. They have dispositioned you before it starts. Now, let's go back to Electoral Commissioner. Did they do their mandated job in making sure everybody coming into the arena to run as a candidate were scrutinized in terms of their financial ability, where they get their money from, their assets, how much money they were going to spend into this campaign. They didn't do that. Did they do that? This whole political process...
Don't you go through an assets declaration?
They didn't do any assets declaration, which, I just don't even have the frame of mind now. But this whole political process was a fraud. It's illegitimate.
Is that not a bit of a...
No, it's not.
Harsh word to use,
you
a fraud?
Because
no, wait. This is the point. It's not so much about sometimes... If you say it's a fraud, do you know what that means? You're basically saying that the president we have is illegitimate because the system itself, that's what you're saying. That's okay, the end of what you're saying.
But that's true.
He's illegitimate?
No, see, he's been voted for, but there is justification for somebody to come and because the electoral commissioner did not do its job. If we don't know how people are making their money, if Messi gets on the field to play and Messi has an electronically induced soccer boots to play with that gives him an advantage because he feels like he's playing on air, is his win against another team legitimate?
How? Explain the electronic bit as far as the ECs work.
Because they gave somebody an undue advantage. We don't know how they made their money. The EC.
But if you say if none of you declared, then it was still the same playing field, wasn't it?
No, it can't be because people are more positioned than the others financially. As we can see on the screen as you were interviewing Professor Neen, that people carrying refrigerators and who we saw the MPP gave away refrigerators and hair dryers, and so obviously it's uneven. If you can have one party give 276 constituencies pickups with branding on it, and I didn't have the money to do that, that dispositions me. So I am seen differently from an MPP candidate, not because they're smarter than me, not because their policies are going to help Ghana than mine, is because they're positioned on the ground better than I am because the electoral commissioner just allowed for the free flow to come in.
All right, hold the thought right there. Interesting points you make. I agree with you that the smaller parties or independent candidates are disadvantaged, even in the balloting process. I thought you would even talk about that. But the point being that you can't reflect fraud on the system like that. A paintbrush, general like that, no, because then, but that's just a quick point. Let me bring in Richard Ahiagbah. He is a communications officer or communications director for the New Patriotic Party. Richard, good morning.
Good morning to you, my brother.
Let me also quickly acknowledge Dr. Jones Opokuwari. He's a criminologist. Dr. Opokuwari, good morning.
Good morning to you, my brother. How are you?
I'm well. Hope you are too.
I agree.
All right, hold your horses for me. Let me go to Richard Ahiagbah. This was quite a pummeling, quite a trouncing. Some people say you were annihilated so badly, they don't know what you can do in Parliament, for example, in the last election. But what are your reflections on the last election and the gargantuan loss of the New Patriotic Party?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers, listeners, and my co-panelists. Yes, as you would have heard.
Richard, please,
yes.
Could you speak up a little for me?
Okay. Is it better now?
I think it is. Thank you.
Okay, great. As you would have heard our flag bearer indicate in his concession speech, we did say that the NDC won the election decisively, to the extent we acknowledge that they have won in that manner. We ourselves appreciate how grave that defeat was for us. And so there's no mincing words on that. We congratulate the NDC and wish them well. Hopefully they would deliver as they have promised, on which basis I'm assuming Ghanaians gave them the mandate. It's a clear mandate they have. They have the burden now to deliver, to justify the confidence reposed in them. We have been rather swift in processing the results. Mainstream party system has started in meeting with stakeholders. Just yesterday, we met with our diaspora team who came to support, most of them, the leaders of the party in their respective countries, to understand what the issues were. But in order to fully appreciate the impact and what the issues were that resulted in that outcome, the party will be putting together a committee starting next year to interrogate the matters and come up with what would most likely be the core issue that maybe we need to address in preparing for 2028. But yes, we've acknowledged the defeat and we're working to get ourselves back. The only unfortunate thing is how the NDC is processing their victory, which is in many ways not in very good taste, discouraging and surprising at some points that they have won. There was no contention about it. The election was peaceful, free, fair, and transparent. And they have won, but somehow they don't understand that they have won. And they are being chaotic on the streets, being disorderly. We think that that, for me, is a shock coming from the election. Otherwise, our defeat, we have embraced and we're working to retool our party for a comeback in 2020.
And Richard, the unruly attacks have been condemned by the media. We've condemned it, the NDC itself, and even as the now president-elect has condemned it roundly. But the point being, we saw this in 2016. We're seeing it in 2024. Let's move beyond the blame game. It's MPP, it's NDC. Let's move beyond that. How do we resolve this moving forward? I have said that maybe as part of the peace pact, we should have the political parties sign on to something also. And in fact, advertise. You see how you, the political parties, you were busily advertising, vote for this person. How about you advertise to your core base, your supporters, and all these media channels that if we win, if we happen to win, whether MPP, NDC, Movement for Change or whatever, don't engage in these actions. What are some of the moves we can put in place to prevent this happening in the next couple of years?
Well, I think the most effective way is to dialogue about it and not equivocate, or probably, as you just tried to do, to try to equalize and say, oh, it happened in 2016.
No, don't misquote me.
No,
I was merely saying that sometimes there is the penchant to say that, oh, it's this side, the attacks. I'm saying that we've experienced it in the past, we're experiencing it now. Let's take off any political lenses. How do we move forward? That's all we're
Yeah. So I'm saying that you can talk about how we move forward without going back. But when you go back, then you create a window, okay, that really does not allow us to move forward. And so you dilute the effort moving forward if you're going back. Now, if it happened yesterday, did you approve of it? If you condemned it last 2016, now let's just condemn it and say that cannot be, and then let's move on. What lessons we learned yesterday, we don't have to go through life trying to relearn that again. We just have to move forward with a certain understanding that we don't approve of it, and so nobody should do it. And that will serve the purpose we are seeking to address. So my view is that if we condemn it in no uncertain term, whether it happened yesterday or not, we're talking about what is happening today. And if we are decisive in condemning it, it will serve as a lesson and discouragement for any other person. And I'm talking with you about it. So if we condemn it without trying to equalize it, which leaves me a window in tomorrow's unfortunate happening of that, then I then find that window as saying, well, when it happened the last time, we were comparing it. So we just keep going back instead of going forward. So that's why I made a point. Not that you were trying to promote actively. I just wanted to correct that. We shouldn't couch it in those terms. Let's look forward and address it. And your question is clear, and I think I appreciate that. It's we constantly talking about it and being clear in our communication to say that is not right. That should not be part of our democracy. We shouldn't encourage that and find the political parties who have just won, make it their responsibility to address that issue. Government security could address that, but the point is that the perception, the optic that will create you might have a situation where some overzealous security person would act in ways that would create the impression that government somehow or the ruling party somehow is not happy about their laws and therefore are persecuting or visiting some on undue punishment on the victors. And so that is something is kind of fishy, it's tricky, I should say, rather. That's why you heard from the New Patriotic Party, we're calling on the NDC and the president-elect to rather call their people to order rather than use the security, because politically, you know, that may create some optics that perhaps may not set a good example or create the understanding that the security is only seeking to enforce law, but it might make it appear as though there's a political persecution. So, yes, it is not right. We should condemn it clearly and roundly. And if that is done, I think that subsequent actors will see the social rejection of that conduct and will not repeat it. I think that that's one of the best ways we can approach it. I'm not sure the political parties themselves can restrain their people, internal party education and awareness creation that are victims and that sort of amount to tyranny and lawlessness.
Mr. Ahiagbah, thank you. I mean, we are following you, but I want to, because of time, let's move the conversation forward. And I want to take you back to your earlier submission. And I hear you on aligning with how the Vice President said the President-elect won decisively. And I also hear you on the point that you are still trying to understand what the issues were, what caused this annihilation of the NPP, so to speak. But the commentary have been pouring in since, I mean, the 7th of December till now. And some words keep recurring, like impudence, like arrogance, like the president not listening to the cry of people. Like I myself have said in a no light way or term that it was a gaslighting situation. How do you respond to this? The commentary suggests that these were the issues, these were the reasons why you lost, because you were not listening to the people, because you were too proud to take us into consideration, and so many things that we saw. In fact, the rhetoric of the NPP, Napo, and so many other things. How do you respond to that?
Well, thank you very much. Those are preliminary sentiments that have been expressed. What, as a political party, you can take to committee, you can work on, begin to plan and strategize around, would be those that have been inquired, and there's sufficient evidence and basis through the work of a committee to suggest that these are the issues and these are the recommendations going forward. But for now, I would not be able to agree or disagree with these sentiments or these opinions that have been expressed by people to say it is A or B that is caused it, until a committee thoroughly examines the issue with evidence and people's account and justifications, and so we have some empirical basis to begin to think more soundly about what has happened. But for now, I would say that people's sentiments, and they are justified, they're not necessarily wrong, but they're not necessarily right. What would be useful, what I think we should all wait and come to terms with, is when the committee that will be put in place, when they examine the issues and the reports are out, then I guess we can be able to say more authoritatively that this and that is a cause or are the causes of our unfortunate loss.
All right, thank you. Please hold if you can. We'll circle back to you for your final comments. But let's also bring in Dr. Jones Opokuwari. He's a criminologist at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about, we're assessing, you know, the aftermath of election 2024, and we've seen the pockets of violence that characterize this election. What would be your initial reflection on everything that we've seen? Professor Enin said that in no small way, the way that political communication or vigilance was used had something to do with the issues that we saw, especially at the collation centers, asking people to move to the collation centers, to be vigilant, turn on your body cams and all that. But what's your reflection on all these?
You and also to your viewers and listeners. I think I couldn't agree more with Prof. It's very true, and I've stated it somewhere, that political and electoral rhetoric that goes on in the country, especially before and during electoral cycles, is normally what fuels some of these things. you can see over the period, what our politicians have done is to create this kind of suspicion, around election cycles, to suggest that there are certain people that have certain, motivated, mindset to commit certain kind of, criminality when it comes to electoral, determining people's and parties' electoral fortunes. So once you have those kind of rhetorics going on, you create a certain psyche in the minds of your followers who probably do not have the same level of appreciation like the leaders, that are speaking. So whenever there is any little, incident, these people jump on it and begin to cause mayhem. So if you look at sometimes the posture of these podcast, leaders on platforms, the things they say, even about institutions that are responsible for, managing the electoral process, it creates this kind of mistrust and cause some of these, people to behave the way we are seeing. So for me, it is not something that I would say is very surprising, because we seem not to have actually changed over the period. If I look at what happened from 2009 through to even 2016 to now, you can see a consistent pattern in terms of how, parties and their followers have responded, to electoral declarations and all that. And it's all because of the kind of political and electoral rhetorics that political leaders have been feeding, their supporters over the period. So Professor Enin is very right, and I agree with him on that assertion.
So in terms of security, before the elections, would you say that we were adequately prepared to handle the issues that we saw, in your expert opinion?
Yeah, yes, I think that what the laxity I've observed is that we didn't pay a lot of attention to the aftermath of the election. Because most of the time, if you look at the political, the security arrangement that have been made or we do over the period, what happens is that a lot more focus and resources is dedicated to, before security, before and during the elections. Okay, we normally forget what happens after election results are declared. And even if we focus on that, normally the focus is on the losing party or the candidates, because we think that if there is supposed to be any conflict or any violence, it's more likely to come from those that have lost. But actually, if you analyze the parties over the period, even from 2009 up to now, you will see that most of these violence are actually committed by people or parties supporters of parties that have been declared as winners. And I think that the security agencies and the election security task force, this is where they have to look at going forward, that the violence is not more of people that may have lost, but probably people that we are likely to declare as winners. And so if you are doing the planning and the security arrangements, most of the attention is supposed to be dedicated to that kind of thing. So I think that on that side, we may have failed, because if we should dedicate more attention to the day and the time of the election. In fact, I was reading a West African peace building report on the 2020 election, and it says that when it comes to election security, the safest place in Ghana now during election cycle is the polling station. Why? Because we seem to deploy more of the resources, and security at the polling station, and then forget what happens after declaration of results. So normally, it gives these parties a lot of time for them to, mobilize boys to cause some of this violence when they think that things are gone their way or even are not going their way. So I think that is where, over the period, going forward, we have to look at as a people.
Well, thank you. Please stay, don't go. Let's come back to the studio, and we do have to wrap up, but let's maybe be concluding on, were you in the middle of something before Ben? Well, otherwise, we'll take your concluding remarks.
Well, the point I made is what they're both saying, which is, we don't wait till after the fact and sit and analyze, well, what could be done, because we knew what was coming in. And the narrative out there are signs of inequality everywhere. And people pick that up and they react. And that's why we get this. So the best way to go is to make sure that we have a constitution that it's pretty specific on what the Electoral Commission has to do. Did it do it? No, it didn't. So we gave advantage to some people. There's not equity at the polling stations. Why? Because our people were denied access. When we got to the polling station, they said, oh, we needed accreditation. We needed a letter from...
Collation centers or
no,
polling stations?
the polling station. When we got there, they said we needed accreditation, that we needed a letter from the EC. What do you mean we need a letter? We gave the letter to the EC and then got accreditations. So we need, the people have the accreditations, they still demanded letter from EC and they denied them access. So these are some of the things where in the last minute, when polling is going on, what do? Go find Miss Jean Mensah and tell her, listen, you need to give up. No. So people get upset and this snowballs to what we see after. And the political parties, they have their own militia.
Okay. And now, Ininto, I've not had a chance to hear you reflect on the security issues yet. Do you agree with what the experts are saying, that the rhetoric, move to the collation centers, turn on your body cams, be vigilant? And I think the NDC did that. They used the word vigilance very early on in the year, and it trickled down all the way. So I think every NDC supporter wanted to be vigilant because their leaders said, be vigilant, otherwise this election will be rigged. But what do you make of all this?
Well, I think the issue has to do mainly with the level of trust and confidence that people have in the Electoral Commission. I think that it was quite clear that there's quite a bit of suspicion, rightly or wrongly, because for us, you know, and I remember in particular myself, when we had those meetings with the National Elections Security Task Force, my biggest concern was actually interference from state agencies that were not authorized to play any security role on the day of elections. I mean, in that discussion, the Inspector General of Police, who happens to be the chairperson of the Security Task Force, gave a lot of assurance. In fact, the architecture that he described, the security architecture that he described to all of the parties was that there will not be any armed personnel immediately around the polling area. And so, therefore, no armed person would be allowed within a certain perimeter. I expected that this same arrangement would be extended to the collation centers. And as far as I'm concerned, there had been some violence, but it doesn't seem like it involved weapons being handled by party people or party agents. It seems like this was direct confrontation. We had raised the issue. Yes, you may not allow weapons or any firearms immediately within the perimeter of the voting or the collating area. But just in case, if there is any sort of escalation, what do you do? We had a lot of assurance that there were plans in place to ensure that no such thing would be allowed to escalate. Of course, on the whole, I do not think that security failed altogether. Yeah. There are things that happened. I'm told there were even 2 deaths. That one, I think, 3? If it's
actually more than that. If I count about 4
related to the election.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, if
3
that,
confirmed, though, from the
if this is ever happening, then this continues to be a major concern and a major issue, that in relationship to voting, anybody should lose their lives, or even a speck of blood would be dropped. I mean, this is something that we got to find a way. There's a lot of talk in this country about things that we ought to do. There are people who are responsible for the things that ought to be done. So if the things are not done, I think we should drill it down to, so how come it was not done? I think on the whole, the management of the security system worked generally well. But for these things to still show up, it means that there is still something.
Okay, for the sake of time,
yes.
Of course, we saw deaths, 8 of them
yes.
in 2020.
And then now
I mean, you remind me of the Owutu Senya incident where someone won and then there was a chase and one person gunned down, the other person was hospitalized. I don't know. Hopefully that other person hasn't capitulated. 2 quick questions. I want you to address them very quickly. 1, the extra layer of regional collation. Some say it impeded the process. It made it longer. If we hadn't had Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia conceding the time he did, imagine what could have happened. So that's one. The regional coalition, should we take it away?
I think it should be, yeah.
Two, this bit about the MPP's loss. If you look at the headline in the New Republic, after claiming he will never hand over to NDC, JM anointed before his, quote, enemy, as Nanado welcomes him back to Jubilee House. Of course, they are playing on Psalms 23, anointed in the presence of my enemies. What lesson, as former General Secretary of the NPP, do you think the NPP should learn from this?
So let me take your first one. Immediately, my answer is yes, that regional coalition interface should be taken away. Because it should be taken away because, you see, the presidential election has only one returning officer. The whole country is the constituency. The whole country is the polling station. So once you get the results from a constituency, that constituency result should be fed direct to the national center, which is the strong room of the Electoral Commission. And that cuts out any possible delays and interferences and so on and so forth. And you would not have any situation where there will be a regional coalition place where people will now gather and all of these things would have
Which
a chance
may
to
have led
occur.
to some of what
Exactly, because what used to happen in the past is that the results will come straight from the constituency to the strong room.
Right.
Nobody gets a chance to gather around another regional coalition center.
Right.
And the strong room security is absolutely fantastic.
Right.
I mean, it's a very enclosed place. You can't just enter. And we saw it here. There was no incident at the National Coalition
So we should
Center.
do away with
We
that.
should immediately, we've done it before. We've used it before.
No, I mean, this was added now. So
yes, but I think...
we should go back to what we're doing.
Yes, exactly. What works?
The
What
MPP's
works is
loss, lesson for them.
Well, I think that, first of all, the president himself should learn a lesson. That when you get the mandate as president, it doesn't mean you become a small god to decide who you hand over to and who you don't hand over to. Those statements that the president made for me were not acceptable. Of course, later on, he was prevailed upon to come and say that he would hand over. But you see, it sent a certain signal, which was not very positive. The people who take political power should have a certain amount of humility. It was not displayed by this MPP government at all, from the president himself right down. And I think it was one of the reasons why the MPP lost so heavily, because people felt that this government and its appointees took everybody for granted.
Okay.
And it went down to the grassroots, of course, on top of the economic hardships, on top of issues of corruption, the Galamsey matters, and the reaction, the statements that were coming out of very high-level appointees of the government, obviously sent a certain signal to the people. So I am not surprised that the NPP has lost so heavily. I hope that they would go back home and learn the lessons of being humble with power and delivering results to the people. Instead of telling people that if you didn't vote for me, then don't expect development in your area and stuff like that.
Thank you. The president said he wouldn't hand over to the former president.
Someone he defeated before.
The system,
things like that.
The system has determined that
of course.
He in fact will hand over.
And all of MPP must learn some lessons.
Right, let's take
Let's conclude with our virtual guests, and that will be a wrap. Richard Ahiagbah and Dr. Opoku-Ware, a minute each. I'll start with you, Richard Ahiagbah. Final thoughts, and then we're gone.
Oh, thank you very much. I think that there's a lot, and I agree with my co-panelists that there's a lot for us in the NPP to process. That's why we're urging our party to remain calm and desist from, if you like, premature conclusions that indicate this was a reason or that was the reason. They may be a basis for those opinions being expressed, but it is better we wait for a more reasoned position to arise through a work of a committee that we can then use as our torchlights to chart a path forward. But for us, we commend the National Democratic Congress and the new president and the majority they have in Parliament, only to say that they better learn the lessons of how to use that majority well, so that it doesn't degenerate into an abuse, which will then work contrary to their own interest and the interest of growing our democracy. So we're going to bounce back. We'll bounce back stronger, having processed the lessons that our committee would bring to the fore and the recommendations.
Richard, thank you very much for your thoughts. Dr. Opoku-Ware, final thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that in terms of security, we have to, electoral security and all that, we have to actually speak to the politicians. I mean, going forward, they need to be very careful with what they say, how they bastardize even institutions that, create some form of mistrust for them and all that. So I'm thinking that this is something that we have to look at. Let's tone down, let's be more reconciliatory, even though it's a competition among political parties. Let's not create situation where people feel that we are fighting with enemies. And I think you just read a paper, one of these newspapers, and how, for instance, we alluded to Psalm 23 to suggest that we were dealing with some enemies and all that. So I think we have to be very reconciliatory in times like this and make sure that we calm tempers down and, extend, more handshake of friendship to people that we compete with. Because this is an election, it's not a revolution or it's not a coup d'etat. And so I think that going forward, let's all be, magnanimous in terms of our victory and how we relate to others during elections.
Thank you. Those who joined us for this conversation, you just heard Dr. Jones Opoku-Ware. He's a criminologist at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. You also heard Richard Ahiagbah. He is a communications director for the New Patriotic Party. We were joined by the Boku legislator, Mahama Ayariga, who is also a member of the transitional team on the NDC's side. He joined the conversation. We had in the studio senior campaign advisor for Alan Kwadwo Kyerematen, the Movement for Change, Nana Oheninto. We also had Kofi Koranting, an independent presidential candidate, joining the conversation. I want to believe I've not left anyone out, apart from Professor Kwesi Enning. Yes, Professor Kwesi Enning, security analyst. He also joined the conversation. And my own in-house guest, Sweetie Amochi, was here as well. Before we take a breather, Ghana, get ready for the biggest giveaway from Syntex Tank. Syntex is visiting 15 communities, giving them free water. This is to say thank you, Ghana, for making us #1. Now, there are a lot of firsts with Syntex. They were the first to introduce double-layer tanks in Ghana. But did you also know that they were the first to come through with tanks in so many colors, inner white layers as well? So if it's not Syntex, you might as well forget about it. If you are a community and you would want to benefit from the Syntex free water giveaway, just log on to their social media handles, go to @SyntexGhana and nominate your community. And the more you nominate, the better the chances that Syntex will come to that community. Also remember, it's SINTEX, Syntex Tank. Don't be any tank be tanko. The correct tank is Syntex Tank. Syntex Tank, are you strong, are you tough? We'll be back after the break with more action. Do stay.